Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, March 28th, 2022. Time for another show. In which I didn't actually watch the cultural event that has everyone talking this morning. Of course, it had everyone talking last night, too, so we should be talked out by now. But no, apparently not. And I have nothing to add to the controversy of last night except to say that it is fraught with 10,000 other controversies, and I don't think I'm going to be able to enlighten you any. That there's nothing I don't think I have thought of that, I don't know, sheds any light whatsoever on the situation at the Oscars last night. And I'm certainly not the person I wouldn't be the person to comment on what happened at the Oscars, no matter what it was. But in this case, it was an issue fraught with, as I said, a million other issues. So you know what I'm talking about. All I learned from Twitter last night was that Chris Rock made a joke, and I don't really know what the joke was. And it was about it was about Jada Pinkett Smith, who's Will Smith's wife, and it was insensitive to the fact that I guess she had some, the condition, alopecia. And I don't know whether he knew that. It doesn't matter to me a great deal because I don't know anything about it myself. And then Will Smith was offended and smacked him. And that brings up 100,000 other issues. And I think we can all agree, try not to smack people. That would be a good idea. Let's not have that happen here. And it is sort of interesting to sort of analyze the various issues that it raises. But that's just not my stuff. I don't know. There's a lot to it, and I don't know if anybody really wants to talk about it anyway, because there's a million other things going on. You may have noticed there's still a global pandemic. There's a war going on in Europe that's occupying a lot of people's attention. And while we could do the same thing with any of those issues. Why aren't we paying attention to wars that are happening elsewhere? Yes, I know. That's true. There's all sorts of things that happened over the weekend, like Ginny Thomas essentially confessed to treason. And we're all trying to decide what to do with that and whether or not that should have any effect on what happens at the Supreme Court. But we know that they're not embarrassed about any of these things, so I guess nothing happens there. Clarence Thomas may or may not still be in the hospital at this point. I don't think anybody has confirmed anything about him. I know everyone forgot him. They're slapping people. They're talking about arresting people. They're talking about subpoenaing people. It's happening all over the place. All right, so that's it. Even if the Oscars had gone well, I wouldn't know anything about it. So I'm certainly not the person to comment. I didn't see any of the movies. Oh, well, I guess I did see one of the movies that was in the running for things, but it didn't win anything, so that's fine. And that has some political implications, too. Boy, there's so much going on. So the first 5 minutes of the show is about what I can't tell you anything about, or won't tell you anything about. So now that that's out of the way, we can talk about some of the other things that did happen over the weekend and what Greg will be willing to talk to you about. And that could take us anywhere. And, it could fill 2 hours. I can assure you of that. First up on my list, I guess, and Greg's list, is that the trucker convoy, the people's convoy, not just trucks, people, the people. Which people? We, the people, of course, because they have it tattooed on their asses. So, that's you too, because we the people. It's we're all anyway. They're giving up. They're going home. It got cold, which is an oddity in the spring. I mean, it does happen. I thought they were tougher than that. The leader of the group, the co-leader, one of the co-leaders, is going on break again. I don't know. So they're breaking things up. Greg's got a piece on that over at the Daily Beast. He didn't write it. He's brought it over to us to review. We'll check in with him about that. I forgot to check to see whether Skype is working properly today, but all the messages are coming through. So cross fingers. I didn't do the sound check that I normally do. And nor did I get the breakfast I usually feel entitled to. I don't know. It was kind of a screwy day today. And maybe it's because I'm thinking too much about the events of last night about which I know nothing. Also happening over the weekend, here comes Greg, another Trump rally. He's still doing these things, and I guess he'll just do them until he drops dead at one, which, that's the one I'm waiting for. Anyway, down in Georgia, he was supposed to be rallying for, I don't know who, a couple of campaigns.
David Perdue.
Down there. David Perdue, okay. The chicken guy. No, the other guy. The other Perdue, the non-chicken Perdue. Though I'm sure he's chicken of something. And, they did the whole spiel. They brought out all the local politicians. The rally's apparently growing smaller and smaller in size, and the people who attend them growing more and more bored and discontented by hearing the old hits over and over again. It had a lock her up thing. It had, him speculating wildly about stuff that he knows nothing about, him promising that the war wouldn't have happened if he had been in office. Plus Marjorie Taylor Greene, because it was happening in Georgia, and she said something where she basically conflated all issues surrounding sexual preference, gender, and orientation, and, all the other terms that we now have had to invent to try to encompass all of this without upsetting anybody, and it's a difficult task, and making some sort of, I don't know, what can I tell you? Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's an idiot. She made a joke about, or she tried to make a joke about Pete Buttigieg, and it somehow involved electric cars and girls' bathrooms. And I don't really see the connection, except that she's mad about Pete Buttigieg because he's different from her. So anyway, terrific rally, and more news about the possibility of Trump as leader of the party flagging in his effectiveness. And that's always good, too. It's all right. Well, I'll hand it over to Greg. Now that you know what I don't know anything about, he'll fill you in on some of those other things. He studied some of them, so that's good news. I
read about him anyway. I don't know if that's the same thing as studying. But Greg Bluestein, who's at the AJC and a great chronicler of all things Georgia,
cool, yes,
noted it was only one of a handful of times, that is to say, the lock them up chant, when Trump said the election was stolen. And David Perdue smiled and thumbs up, one of the very few times he did that, because he avoided doing that in 2020 and lost. But it was one of only a handful of times that the crowd, a much smaller and less enthusiastic gathering than we've ever seen at a Trump rally in Georgia, grew animated. Time and time again, the audience greeted applause lines with drowsy silence, and even Trump struggled to captivate the crowd.
Yeah, I mean, they've heard it all before, but this is like going to the county fair to see, the old band play their hits, but they're just, I don't know, it's just not that exciting. It's an excuse to drink beer and hang out, but this,
right, but the weather's not good, and so, you go home.
Right.
We could almost hear crickets when he launched into a rant about his support for Buckhead cityhood. That's also when we noticed the first trickle of attendees head for the gates. Soon a growing wave followed. So, the rally didn't go all that well. And, Trump is having issues everywhere. But, of course, that's not the problem. Trump is the problem. Trump is not the problem with the GOP. The GOP is the problem with the GOP. And let me give you a couple of examples of that. Right. One is this really interesting and overlooked story and thread by Dave Roberts, who currently is at Volts.
Yes, right.
And his initials are DR. So whenever he writes DR Volts, I'm always, Dr. Volts here.
Right. It's about electric cars.
The electrical doctor. Yeah. The story is genuinely amazing, and the story is finger-pointing ensues after Congress fails to extend universal school meals.
Okay.
And David Roberts says it should be in a museum somewhere, this story, to illustrate all the dysfunctions of U.S. politics and media in 2022. What he means by that is the reason that the school meals wasn't extended like everybody was expecting it to is Mitch McConnell decided that for the purposes of the budget, he wouldn't support it. And so Republicans wouldn't support it. And Manchin Cinema, et cetera, it was dropped from Biden's proposed budget.
Yes, okay.
Dropped from whatever reconciliation they did to actually pay for stuff. Here's what happened. Biden extended the universal free meals program to the nation's public schools, allowing 10 million additional kids to get lunch. Educators who unanimously said the program is much needed We're all expecting another year's extension, but Mitch McConnell interceded in the major spending bill that's now being assembled. He drew a hard line, no extension of the program, 10 million kids cut off from lunch. Why? An aide called it an attempt to clamp down on government spending and get schools back to normal. Which, David Roberts says, is monstrous. Of all the things government is spending on, McConnell goes here to funnel extra money.
Yeah.
Food out of 10 million kids' mouths. But look at the headline. Finger pointing ensues. What? McConnell did it. You can argue over his reasons.
I pointed it.
Everybody acknowledges he did it. Only one finger, only one point, only one direction.
I get you. Yeah,
right? Down, Democrats on a long list of school groups are pointing at McConnell because he did it. That's why they're pointing at him. It's not a question. And then the head of the School Nutritional Association, who says in the article that they support both Democrats and Republicans and therefore have to straddle a line, basically, to try to appear neutral, says Congress's failure to act will cause students to go hungry. Congress has failed to act.
Yes.
Congress. It's McConnell.
Yeah, and it wasn't a failure on his part. It was intentional. There should be there should be a political cartoon of Mitch McConnell slapping a school kid's lunch out of his mouth. But
right, and this is yet another illustration, Dave Roberts, Dr. Boltz says, of why Dems cannot simply rely on mainstream media to inform the public. Both sides' disease, the sick politesse with which we treat this crap, makes it impossible, he didn't say crap, for the vast bulk of the public to suss out what's happening. If Dems had their own communication machine, even a fraction of what the right has, they could tell the public, Republicans want to cut off hungry kids from free school lunch during a pandemic, and we want to feed the kids, and repeat.
Yes.
But nothing.
Oh, well, they're busy.
Right. So that's problem number one with the Republicans. Problem number two with the Republicans, you mentioned the People's Convoy.
Yes.
Turns out
we being the people.
That this head of the People's Convoy, a fellow named Brian Brace,
yes,
who, as the report in Daily Beast says, fled Hagerstown again over the weekend and made continued splintering within the group, which is why they're all going home. I mean, they're from California. This weather is not, they probably didn't come prepared.
It never rains in Southern California.
But he was caught on something that he didn't know was an open mic, saying, yeah, I would have been there on January 6th. Of course I would have been there. It's ridiculous.
Well, he would have said that if he had known, he still would have said it, I imagine.
A lot of the people here were at January 6th.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, good, take pictures of everybody who's still left and send that to the FBI.
I guess so,
Maybe these are the few people you're still looking for.
For the most part, it would just be bragging, but it is an interesting thing to brag about. I mean, the guy is all about, living in the reflected glory of other people's accomplishments, and he needs to go home and think of an original idea.
Right. So, as the story says, from claiming that the average D.C. residents who flipped off truckers during their never-ending beltway loops were agents of Antifa, never did figure out how to pronounce it, to being hilariously trolled by a single bicyclist, and eventually getting a permit swatted down by the U.S. Park Service, the convoy kept stepping on rakes.
Yes, right. Truck full of rakes showed up.
6 Antifa vehicles, one trucker yelled in a CB. Keep your heads on a swivel.
How about on a pike?
Yeah. So, one gets the impression that every time they saw a black driver, they'd go nuts.
Yes, right.
Because, what's driving it? And then, of course, there's Ted Cruz. Big story in the Washington Post today. Inside Ted Cruz's last-ditch battle to keep Trump in power, the Texas senator's effort alienated some allies. I mean, you're kidding. Allies found another reason to dislike Ted Cruz. I'm shocked.
Allies.
And sparked questions about ties to John Eastman, a longtime friend and author of key legal memos in Trump's efforts.
Author now.
As Eastman outlined a scenario in which Vice President Mike Pence could deny certifying Biden's election, Cruz crafted a complementary plan in the Senate. So it's a two-pronged attack here. Mike Pence denies certifying, and the Senate objects to the results in 6 swing states, famously tried, and delaying accepting the Electoral College on January 6th in favor of a 10-day audit, potentially enabling GOP state legislators to overturn the result. 10 other senators backed his proposal, which Cruz continued to advocate on the day rioters attacked the Capitol.
Yes.
Rioters, insurrectionists.
Yes.
The committee's interest in Cruz is notable as investigators zero in on how closely Trump's allies coordinated with members of Congress in the attempt to block or delay certifying Biden's victory. If Cruz's plan worked, it could have created enough chaos for Trump to remain in power.
Well, sure. If my plan had worked, then he would have been thrown off the
6
cliff.
years later, Trump, chaos. Remember that link?
Yes.
Chaos agent?
That guy.
That's
I remember
him.
that part. Yeah.
Liz Cheney says it was a very dangerous proposal and, could easily have put us in territory where we got to the inauguration. There was not a president, said Liz Cheney. Honestly. And I think that Senator Cruz knew exactly what he was doing. I think Cruz is somebody who knows what the Constitution calls for, knows what his duties and obligations are, and was willing, frankly, to set it aside.
Yes, of course.
So that's interesting. And Michael Luttig, J. Michael Luttig, a U.S. Appeals Court judge, now retired, I think.
Yeah, okay. Well, good for him.
Cruz and Eastman had known each other since they clerked together 27 years ago. Cruz's proposal ran on a parallel track to Eastman memos, and Luttig told the Post he believes that Cruz, who once said that Luttig was like a father to me, played a paramount role in the events leading to January 6th.
Okay.
He says, Luttig says, once Ted Cruz promised to object, January 6th was all but foreordained because Cruz was the most influential figure in the Congress willing to force a vote on Trump's claim that the election was stolen. He was also the most knowledgeable of the intricacies about the Electoral Count Act and the Constitution and the ways to exploit the two. So if you were looking for another reason to dislike Ted Cruz as quickly as possible, just, to make things easier, there it is.
Okay, that's a good one for him to try. I mean, the plan was no better than it ever was when Eastman had written it up, but he was
members
the guy
of Congress were involved. It wasn't just the wives of Supreme Court justices.
Yes, right.
It was also members of Congress. So who else did Ginny Thomas text?
So one day we'll find out, I guess. Interesting thing about Ted Cruz and his plan is it just brought me back to the video that emerged of the rioters in the Senate chamber finding his notebook and flipping through it. Now, this is his notebook, his playbook for how to execute this January 6th insurrection. And the rioters read it and become convinced that he's a traitor to their cause, which is really pretty interesting. It's just a matter of reading comprehension, but there you go. So it was a definitely a chaotic day. Even the rioters didn't understand that Ted Cruz was trying to do their bidding, but that's because the rioters, I think, are considerably dumber even than Ted Cruz.
Okay, so I'm old and I don't remember everything, but as you're describing them, looking through the playbook there, I had a flash of the old Baltimore Colts and Tom Matte when John Unitas and all the quarterbacks were injured and the running back had to step in and play quarterback for a couple of plays.
Wow.
And he had all the plays Sharpied onto his wrist so he could look at them and call them.
That's a good plan.
Just to get through the game.
Yeah.
And, it's there you are. You're performing. You're supposed to know this. And you're still looking it up. And what are we supposed to do now? So this guy finds Ted Cruz's notebook and says, okay, we're the dog. We caught the car. Now what? Maybe there's something in his notebook that tells us what to do now. I just want to make sure we're not missing something. We're supposed to go and take the gavel and hold it up and say we run the place now? I mean, what are we supposed to do? Maybe it's in his notebook.
Yeah, it's an odd thing.
Oh, my God. He was just like, he didn't really believe this stuff.
Yeah, well, that's pretty interesting, too.
He thinks we're jerks. He thinks we're stupid.
Wow,
he wouldn't have allowed us in his study group when he was at law school.
Probably not.
So right here in his notebook.
Yeah, I don't really know what I guess I don't know if they knew whose notebook they were even looking through, but
it was in his desk.
Yeah, I guess.
Do those desks have names on them, like in grade school?
Nameplate. They are assigned desks.
But do they have names? I mean, like if a civilian walked in there, would they know, oh, this is Ted Cruz's desk from some sign or actually, signal?
They might, although now that I think about it, it's not up front it's not like the UN where or a hearing
that's
room
what I'm
where
asking.
the nameplate is up front. But I think it is on the desk, but maybe on the front, like visible to them in terms of this is where you sit. You need to know this. They don't put their names visible to the outside, I don't think. But anyway, I think there is something that should have identified it as his desk, and there was probably something in the binder too. It was just odd because I don't know, the thing that stuck out that they really thought they were reading something and they just couldn't grasp it, and they were getting ready to go after Cruz too. Like they could easily have misunderstood things and hanged Cruz along with Pence. And then that would have been something.
Yeah.
Coming back from the session,
Sorry, bro, my mistake.
Yeah, there was an objection when we were rudely interrupted by the riot, but Pence is ready to rule in your favor now, except he's dead, and so is the guy who made the objection. So, okay, never mind, we'll go ahead, and Joe Biden is president. Whoops.
Right. And then, finally, the GOP are bad actors. And that's the thing. You have to understand that all arguments made by the GOP are not made in good faith.
Yeah. Well,
they're all BS. So, you have to come from, and then every once in a while you get one that is made in good faith, and you have to, be aware of that. But the default ought to be, okay, you're lying.
Yeah, it'll serve you well.
And it's especially true when you're looking at Ted Cruz, and when you're looking at Mitch McConnell, when you're looking at Kevin McCarthy. I mean, the default is they're lying.
Try not to. Yeah. Easy rule of thumb.
Easy rule of thumb. So Joe Trippi notes there's a PRRI poll out now.
Okay.
The persistence of QAnon in the post-Trump era and analysis of who believes the conspiracies. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans identify as QAnon believers. 1 in 4 Republicans, notes Trippi, identify as QAnon believers. Even higher among Republicans who trust Newsmax, OAN, or Fox News.
If you say you trust any of them, you're too far gone. It doesn't matter.
Perhaps the most visible role QAnon has played was in the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the Capitol. Note they call it an insurrection. Note they tie it to QAnon.
All right.
From which the QAnon shaman became an iconic image. Yes. And there's another tie-in? A QAnon-believing Ginny Thomas.
Yes, right. Oh, my God. Was she far gone?
Fortunately, the goal of keeping Trump as president despite his electoral defeat was not achieved. Even through Trump leaving office, major social media platforms banning QAnon activity and the leader of the movement, called Q, disappearing from the internet, QAnon has continued to thrive on alternative platforms with a handful of influencers leading the group. PRI data also shows that the proportion of Americans who believe or at least open to believing QAnon conspiracies held mostly steady throughout 2021. To attempt to understand both the scope and the makeup of the QAnon movement, PRI fielded a set of 3 questions in 4 different surveys. Okay. Agree, disagree, mostly disagree, completely disagree.
And yargle bargle.
The government, media, and financial worlds in the U.S. are controlled by a group of Satan-worshipping pedophiles who run a global child sex trafficking operation.
Right, check. I'm for that.
Okay. Completely disagree 60%, which is great, but completely agree 5, mostly agree 11.
Completely. Okay, yeah.
All right, so that's 16% of the population there. And why is that important?
That's funny, too.
Because when you're talking about Josh Hawley going after Judge Jackson over child porn sentencing.
Yes.
He's not so subtly trying to tie her to a group of Satan-worshipping pedophiles who run a global child sex trafficking operation, and she's easy on them.
Yeah.
I mean, the tie-in here is just, it's not even subtle. And so, when you're listening to it and you're like a normie, it's like, what is he talking about?
Yeah.
But if you're tuned into Q stuff, you know exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, although I wonder, I mean, he did seem to frame it in a way that, normies could just say, wow, she's actually pretty soft on crime.
Plausible deniability.
Really, not really understanding
which crime.
Angle. Right. And I think that was actually aimed as much at the public as it was at Democratic senators, as it turns out, because Democratic senators appear, for the most part, to be clueless to the Q connection of everybody, including Hawley. And, maybe the Ginny Thomas story might have woken him up to it over the weekend, possibly. What is this thing where, big names are saying this crazy stuff? Yeah, that's what Hawley was talking about. Oh, I just thought Hawley was a jerk. Huh. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, Chris Coons definitely doesn't realize it. He said, I don't know if there were references to Q during these hearings. I don't even know what Q is. I wouldn't recognize them if I saw them. That's the problem, Senator. So Will Sommer has a nice thread about that, and I have it in the Pundit Roundup. Well, here are some of the QAnon references Ginny Thomas was making. The idea of watermarked ballots being used to catch Democratic voter fraud is big in QAnon. But I'm especially interested in her idea of military white hats, and that's a key QAnon phrase. The video Thomas shared with Meadows, according to the Washington Post story about her discovered emails, is no longer available on YouTube, but Thomas wrote to Meadows, I hope this is true. Never heard anything like this before, even a hint of it. Is it possible? Watermarked ballots in over 12 states have been part of a huge Trump and military White House sting operation in battleground states, she wrote. This is Ginny Thomas.
Yes, all the bad things that happen are all secret undercover sting operations by Trump.
Ginny Thomas sent Meadows a Steve Pisanek video about a QFS system. QFS is Quantum Financial System, an idea of a mythical money system that will bring on a sort of right-wing utopia. The first of the 29 messages, says the Washington Post story, between Ginny Thomas and Meadows was sent on November 5th, 2 days after the election. She sent him a link to a YouTube video labeled Trump Sting with CIA Director Steve Pisanek, the biggest election story in history, QFS blockchain.
Okay, QFS. That's new on me.
Right, so you could look up Quantum Financial System on Wikipedia, and it's a hot mess.
Yeah, I'll bet. I mean,
okay.
All right.
This guy,
worse than NFTs.
Steve Pisanek, is a regular InfoWars guest, by the way. And then finally, Ginny Thomas references the idea of Democratic elites being imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay, a huge QAnon tell. Interestingly, the text she's pulling from, like UFS, is big on Iraqi dinar forums.
Oh, what?
In a November message to Meadows, Thomas went on to quote a passage that circulated on right-wing websites, quote, Biden crime family and ballot fraud co-conspirators, elected officials, bureaucrats, etc., are being arrested and detained for ballot fraud right now and over coming days, and will be living in barges off Gitmo to face military tribunals for sedition.
Sure they will.
So I'm just saying, Ginny Thomas is really deep in this, and so is the GOP. And if you're saying, oh, well, you mean the GOP electeds? Well, 1 out of 5 GOP who identify themselves as voters.
Yeah, they truly, are...
As they say, red-pilled...
Willing to say it over and over again, that's for sure. Yeah, right. And Ginny Thomas, I mean, like, certifiably insane stuff. The worst of the dumbest conspiracy theories we ever saw, and she's passing them to Meadows. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We return to our train of thought here. By the way, Greg shared with me over the break that Boo Radley has sent us via Twitter a photo and a link to the story of, it's Tom Maddy, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, and the I guess his obituary here, but the story of his filling in as quarterback briefly, and there's the wrist. It was on a wristband. I thought when you told me the story, like he had written, just written it down on his arm, like a telephone number that you were trying to remember, or notes when Trump. Remember when Trump was it Trump? No, it was the other dummy. What's her name? Sarah Palin actually wrote on her hand. Trump had notes on his paper.
Yeah, Sarah Palin had all of them, Katie, tattooed on her wrist.
Yeah,
just
but
so
here
she'd
he is.
remember to tell Kate Curry. This,
right. What have you read? Oh, everything, including my hand. So
which
here he
newspapers
is.
do you read? All of them.
And so I'm surprised she didn't say what newspapers you read. Left. Oh, I'm sorry. All of them.
Lamp.
Where I parked is written on this. He's got it. The
That was a
place written down,
Republican thing.
not on the skin of his hand or arm, but on a wristband, which is now a huge, like, standard operating procedure thing for quarterbacks in complex systems, particularly in college. I guess I see them, but they have specialized wristbands that have a like a little window in them that you can insert a printed page into that has the playbooks, and that flips closed. So I guess if you get sacked enough times, like they can't read it while they're getting up off of on top of you after
Right,
they sack
invented
you.
by Tom Maddy in the mid-'60s.
He's a visionary, and he's come up with something that is now standard in NFL and college level, high level programs. So that's great news. Not much of a masker, as it turns out. It's a good thing he wasn't around for coronavirus, because he's wearing the single bar across the face thing, and you need more protection than that. But those were early days.
At least he was wearing a helmet.
Yeah, I mean that's a big innovation, I think, for them too.
So
All right.
back to the numbers. Demographics of
them.
QAnon believers. Looking only at the 16% who are QAnon believers, 43% are Republicans, 27% are independents, and a smaller share of Democrats and other political parties, 19 and 12. Democrats. And those 19 must be, legacy Democrats like in the Panhandle and Kentucky. Religiously, about 1 in 5 QAnon believers identify as white evangelical Protestants. Remember, that's PRRI's thing, is looking at religion and politics.
Okay. Well, they like the word protest in Protestant.
Religiously unaffiliated Americans make up 17%, along with smaller shares of others. When looking at race and ethnicity, around 6 in 10 believe, 58%, are white Americans. Hispanic Americans account for around 1 in 5, or 20%, and black Americans over 1 in 10, or 13%. Less than 1 in 10 believers are of other races or ethnicities. QAnon believers are significantly less likely than all Americans to have college degrees. In fact, 9 in 10 have less than 4-year college degrees. Only minimal age differences between QAnon believers and the general population, and they're most likely to have household incomes of less than $50,000 a year.
All right, so it's economic anxiety.
Plurality live in suburban areas.
Okay, so it's suburban anxiety.
Yeah. And about a third of QAnon believers say they most trust mainstream news, compared to a majority of all Americans who say 53%.
Mistrust, I see, yes.
They most trust mainstream news. 34%.
They most trust?
34% of them do, whereas the majority of the population of all Americans, 53% do.
I see. Oh, okay. All right. I was like, well...
So 53% of Americans trust mainstream news, and only 34% of QAnon believers do.
All right. Well, that explains the big difference between
They'd rather go with Fox
guess.
News or far-right news outlets like One American News and Newsmax, or anything else that Russia funds.
Right.
They didn't put RT in here, but they should have.
Right. Crazy news. I should start a news network for the totally crazy, and they might buy it.
So here's the thing. Media consumption is the strongest independent predictor of being a QAnon believer. Americans who most trust far-right news outlets like One America and Newsmax are nearly 5 times more likely than those who most trust mainstream news to be QAnon believers. So if you want to wean off a QAnon, you got to wean them off the crazy news channels they watch.
What would there even be to believe if you didn't believe Q? And I'm surprised it's not 100%. If you watch One America News and Newsmax and all that, and you aren't a Q believer, why are you watching? What do you think? What are they telling you that isn't that? I don't even know. I like the commercials. I'm watching it like the Super Bowl for the commercials. All right. There's a lot of people in the world. What can I tell you?
Anyway, so reading all about that, and thinking about the QAnon influence, both in the Republican Party and on the wife of a Supreme Court justice, with the odd concept that you're supposed to pretend that, like, she never talked to her husband about any of this.
Right.
Made me notice this story that somebody had tweeted around by Jake Rawson, Rossen, Jake Rawson, in October of 2016 on the website Mental Floss.
I've heard of it.
Which is about
popular
satanic panic in the 80s.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And again, being told I go back to the 60s, and my first thought was, Flip Wilson, the devil made me do this.
Yeah, I guess it has a long history.
Films like The Exorcist, The Omen, and Amityville Horror thrilled audiences with stories about occult occurrences. But by the 80s, social critics were sounding alarms that a groundswell of actual satanic activity was responsible for subversive, soul-polluting behavior. Right? When you think of QAnon, you got to remember this, because it's the same thing, just like written differently.
Yes.
And 1980 book, Michelle Remembers, purported to tell the story of Satanists who kidnapped and brainwashed a young woman, a spark that led to both the media and law enforcement driving home narratives that blamed ritualistic evil for crime and mass entertainment. Take a look at 8 instances where self-appointed pop culture analysts insisted the devil was in the details. Okay, number 1, Satan's Vessels, Thundercats, and the Smurfs.
Thundercats and the Smurfs. I don't recall them as...
Author Phil Phillips published Turmoil in the Toy Box, a book detailing how Masters of the Universe and other popular cartoons of the era were endorsing pagan practices through coaxial cables.
That's great. Turmoil in the Toy Box. It'd probably take a good 20 minutes.
How much I would entertain you here. With Pastor Gary Greenwald, Phillips also shot a video that elaborated on his theories. The question is there a well-organized plot in a city's design right now to program and influence the minds of our children toward the occult and witchcraft?
By the power of Grayskull, I hope not.
It was rhetorical, as the two explained that Thundercats were inspired by heathen gods, E.T. died and was resurrected again, and could therefore be confused with Christian figures, and there are things we need to look at concerning the Smurfs.
If you take a look at the Smurfs, you'll see there's things we need to look at.
And again, being old, what mental association do I make? Tom Lear singing about smut.
Okay.
One of his great lines. I could tell you things about Peter Pan and the Wizard of Oz. There's a dirty old man.
Probably.
So, it's all in the eye of the beholder is his point.
I guess so.
Because the characters are blue with black lips, they were just depictive of dead creatures. And collectively, Saturday morning cartoons would teach children to get into spells and witchcraft. The two concluded their video essay by pointing out that Rainbow Bright had a pentagram on her cheek.
Did she?
Then there was the Judas Priest trial. In December 1985, 18-year-old Raymond Belknap and 20-year-old James Vance ended a long night of drinking by committing to a suicide pact. Belknap shot and killed himself. Vance attempted, but wound up surviving with grievous and permanent disfiguring injury. And both men had been fans of the rock group Judas Priest, who had been reputed to have recorded subliminal messages in their music. So Vance's parents decided to sue the band and CBS Records for $6 million in damages, alleging phrases like "do it" and "let's be dead" were being delivered to Vance's subconscious.
The problem is that people weren't putting enough thought into their subliminal messaging.
Yeah, when the case went to a civil trial in 1990, audio engineers played the group's music backward and forward at varying speeds in an attempt to discern whether or not there were any hidden urgings. Ultimately, a judge ruled that there was no message in the music, because if you play it backwards, Paul is dead,
Right. And everyone was playing their records backwards.
Right. Speaking of Rolling Stone, in 2015, lead singer Rob Halford expressed both relief and disappointment in the tragic circumstances had the judge found in favor of subliminal messages having the power to physically manifest themselves and make people do something. The ramifications of that would be extraordinary. How do you prove to somebody there's not subliminal messages on your record when you can't hear them in the first place?
Yes. I don't know.
Prove they're not there. Well, I don't hear them. Well, you're lying.
Right.
Okay, and that's just a sampling of some of the things. Here's one. The Dungeon Master, introduced in 1974, Dungeons and Dragons quickly captured the imaginations of gamers and almost immediately found themselves embroiled in controversies over the game's sorcery and occult elements.
Yes. So
right?
Fun.
That hysteria reached new levels with the 1979 disappearance of James Egbert, a 16-year-old computer science student who was believed to have gotten lost in the underground steam tunnels near Michigan State University. And the media quickly jumped on the theory that Egbert had become too absorbed in his role-playing and suffered a mental breakdown. Like, he was caught in the tunnels of Zork.
Oh.
He was in a dark, twisty passage, which was different than the twisty, dark passage, and so he couldn't find his way out.
Well, that's really the engineer's fault, more than...
But the truth was less sinister, though just as tragic. Egbert had been suffering from the demands of being a child prodigy, as well as shame over his homosexuality, prompting him to run away from school, and then committed suicide in 1980. A fictionalized account for the case, Mazes and Monsters, was made for TV in 1982, starring Tom Hanks.
Oh. Well...
Okay, so, I mean, again, hysteria, it's important to remember these things because you look at the pedophile Pizzagate stuff and say, where did that come? there's actually a long history of this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Pampers diapers. In 1985, Procter & Gamble found itself in the unusual position of having to hold a press conference to deny that they were funding a satanic church.
Right.
Their logo, a man in the moon surrounded by 13 stars, was secretly the mark of the devil, critics claim. So many calls poured into the distributor of Ivory soap, Pampers diapers, and other household toiletries, they were forced to set up a toll-free number to refute allegations they were beholden to the Church of Satan.
Hello, you've reached the non-satanic call line.
Right. As for the stars, when the company was formed in 1882, they were intended to represent the original 13 colonies.
All right. Oh, so they were
patriotic, and
yes.
Of course they were forced out of their patriotism, so the symbol has been removed from the packaging since that time.
And we've never recovered. Forcing our patriotism out of our toothpaste and diapers. How dare you? Bring God back into school, please.
And then, just like Ted Cruz, if you need another reason to dislike him, there's the Geraldo incident. At the height of satanic hysteria in 1988, color me surprised, broadcast journalist Geraldo Rivera compiled a 2-hour special for NBC that purported to detail the lurid mission of devil worshippers.
Yeah.
Devil worship, exposing Satan's underground, posited that a secret cabal of Satanists numbering in excess of 1 million were responsible for messages in heavy metal, inspiring the behavior of cult leaders like Charles Manson. The majority of them linked in highly organized secretive network, Rivera intoned. From small towns to large cities, they've attracted police and FBI attention to their satanic ritual, child abuse, child pornography, and grisly satanic murders. Now, the odds are this is happening in your town.
Right.
So if you think this whole thing about ritual child abuse and child pornography and satanic stuff from Q is new, it ain't new.
That's true. Goody Proctor told me about it. It's been around a while.
Right. The special aired in prime time to stellar ratings, grabbing the attention of nearly 20 million homes, although advertisers were reluctant to buy commercial spots. The mass media took care to note that the special didn't come from NBC's news programmers. It was a product of the network's entertainment division. Well, they're the same division now, I believe.
Should be, if not. But, okay, yeah, I get you.
Right. Edutainment.
Entertainment. All right. Well, Al Capone's vault didn't work out.
He's
not a good reporter.
Well, no, he started out as a lefty lawyer. It's just so weird to watch his arc, but that's a different story for a different day.
Yeah, well, him and Glenn Greenwald.
So again, the deep roots of the Pizzagate scandal in American politics and subculture is just something to be reminded of, and perhaps it's not surprising that at least the older QAnon followers have some fertile ground here to have those conspiracies seeded into.
Yeah, I guess.
I heard about this. I remember that when I was a kid.
Yeah. Of course, interesting. I bet some of them
picked
are
up
the right
by
age.
the churches, and even if it's not the pastor who's doing this in the pulpit, it's what people talk about.
Yeah.
It's spread from there. And so, it's one of the reasons why this whole QAnon and conspiracy and election was stolen stuff is so hard to get rid of, because who are your news sources? It isn't just, OAN and Fox News. It's what are your neighbors talking about? What do you hear at church on Sunday?
I guess so. And, when you don't have to construct a particularly good story in order to become part of the QAnon lore, it's easy, low barriers to entry, right? All you have to do is say, look at this picture of, some politician I don't like, and he's standing there, and he's on a street corner, and there's a bus behind him, and the bus has the number 13 on it, and that's just a reference.
It tells you everything you need to know.
Right.
There's a 13th floor in this building.
Exactly. And then
Ghostbusters.
And then I think at that point you can start a GoFundMe, and then they just send you a couple $1,000s to continue your work.
Right,
so
exactly.
It's very inspiring.
So switching topics, this is a tweet I noticed this morning by Joe Scarborough.
Wow, He
tweeted out a Wall Street Journal page, screenshot of the Wall Street Journal print edition. Biden's remark on Putin stirs anxiety among Western allies.
Right. Oh, yes. We haven't gotten to that. Thank you.
Economic anxiety, I guess. Which in some cases is economic anxiety. So the other headline is Ukraine forces advances, Russia regroups. That's pretty clear now. Ukraine's winning in the north, and Russia is trying to consolidate in the south and claim the areas near Crimea for their own by getting rid of mayors, making Russia the official language, insisting you wear your underwear on the outside and all the other stuff dictators do.
Old school stuff they do.
But in any case, Biden's remark on Putin stirs anxiety among Western allies, and Scarborough writes, substitute Reagan with Biden, and you're looking at 1985.
Yes. The tear down this wall thing? Or?
Yeah, exactly. Which
strong leader.
Got everybody really anxious. So interesting, David Rothkopf's story today in the Daily Beast. Biden's facts don't care about Putin's feelings. This isn't about Biden's apt ad lib. It's about stealing, S-T-E-E-L-I-N-G. We talk about Republicans, so we're always thinking S-T-A-L, but this is stealing yourself for a long battle between democracy and autocracy. While America's media is embroiled in another confected controversy, this one about whether Biden hurt Vladimir Putin's feelings by speaking the truth, it's missing two far bigger stories. One of those stories is a historical shift signaled by Biden's Warsaw speech. While some compared it to Kennedy's Ich bin ein Berliner speech on Reagan's Mr. Gorbachev tear down that wall address, Biden's was more like the speech given by Winston Churchill in Missouri on March 5th, 1946. In that speech, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
Yes, iron curtain.
It was Winston Churchill who invented that term. And he defined the front line of Europe's new Cold War reality. With his remarks, Biden acknowledged that solely as a consequence of the ruthless aggression of Vladimir Putin, Europe was once again divided. More broadly, he defined this struggle of the moment as a great battle for freedom, a battle between democracy and autocracy, between liberty and repression, between rules-based order and one governed by brute force. Biden's remarks to the massive outdoor crowd in Poland were a call to action, not just to stop Putin, but as American listeners surely noted, to recognize the threats to democracy that exist within our own country. He not only praised the courage of the people of Ukraine, but made it clear that they were fighting on behalf of all of us who value democracy worldwide. He enumerated the ways that the U.S. and our allies would seek to aid Ukraine, but also made it clear our commitment extended beyond the current war. We must commit now to be in this fight for the long haul. We must remain unified today, tomorrow, and the day after, and for the years and decades to come. It'll not be easy. There will be costs, but it's a price we have to pay because the darkness that drives autocracy is ultimately no match for the flame of liberty that lights the souls of free people everywhere. Rather a stirring speech. It was pretty remarkable.
Nice. I think the line that disturbed everybody wasn't in there yet, though.
For God's sake, the man cannot remain in power, he added. And while controversy swirled around the remark, and the White House later sought to walk it back, and I have to note for the record, the blob, the shorthand term for the foreign policy establishment in D.C. that gets everything wrong but never takes any responsibility for it, which is why they're called the blob. You really can't pin down, who's responsible because they make it that way. While controversy swirled around the remark and the White House later sought to walk it back, the moment of clarity from the plain-spoken president elevated that speech. It made it clear that Biden's passion was deeply felt and real. Truth at a time when it's essential to be honest about Putin's barbarism and the threat he poses not just to the world, but to the people of his own country. It addressed the geopolitical shift with long-term consequences for the world, and while it clarified the starkness of the divide in America between Biden's party and his opponents, it also underscored the president's deep sense of urgency concerning the crisis in Ukraine. Since it's unlikely that Putin can sustain a protracted conflict in Ukraine, two possibilities remain. Either he escalates the war or he finds a way to withdraw while saving face. Now, the first option could be linked to Russia's explicit and implicit threats to the use of weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
And while this sort of escalation is a possibility Western planners should take seriously, it may also be one that Russia recognizes would only deepen their problems associated with the invasion. That may be why, in the past week, Russian military spokespeople have spoken of a shift in Russian priorities away from broader objectives to consolidating the holdings in eastern Ukraine, such as the Donbass, Luhansk, and Crimea. While there are a few less reliable sources in the Russian government, they themselves said that that's what they were doing.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll see if we believe them.
So then he goes on and talks about how the rebuilding program is needed. So, it's not everybody who says, oh, my gosh, what a mistake. What are we going to do now? I heard it and said, good. Glad he said it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it may.
Prevailing
What if
sentiment.
Putin's going to do what Putin does? Why do
Yes.
we have to be, linked to how Putin reacts in regard to what we say? He's already shown us what he's going to do.
Yeah.
How about just, laying it out there for everybody?
I don't see any issue. I mean, it's certainly no worse than calling for regime change, as we used to disguise it. This is what the United States does all the time. I mean, it might not be a great course of action. It might be something we get embarrassed about from time to time.
Well, but that's the thing. Again, this goes back to what I said about the GOP not arguing in good faith. The critics who are complaining about what he said typically have nothing to say
when it's
about, let's say, Donald Trump calling Kim in North Korea Little Rocket Man and threatening to invade the country, which he did, by the way. He did say those things. He didn't do those things, but he said those things.
Yes, right. And then he fell in love with them or something.
Oh, well, he's strong, and he speaks strongly about strong things because strong people do strong things, and Joe Biden can't even remember what they, come on.
Yeah.
These are not good faith arguments, and they should be dismissed for what they are.
No, and you don't even have to be Trumpy to see that duplicity, right? When a Republican president makes a statement like that, it's about drawing lines and strong, and there's a sense of right and wrong, and America is on the side of the right. And when a Democratic president does it, oh my God, it's terrible. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's losing control of everything.
Right. And then again, the last thing I should note, because it's, Monday, and we're trying to round up everything that happened.
Yes.
The Oscars were last night. And of course, the big news was Summer of Soul won Best Documentary.
Yeah, that's a bright spot for the big news.
There's some wonderful, wonderful music there, a documentary you should see. And our own Denise Oliver Velas is actually in the movie commenting on it.
Well.
Because you can't separate the politics from the music.
That we were not supposed to.
And
do it now.
When Denise wrote up the documentary back in July 2021, when it came out, she highlighted some of the people that were in the movie, not necessarily the pieces they showed, but just stuff that they were doing at the time.
Yeah.
And one of my favorites she highlighted, and this is on YouTube, is Little Stevie Wonder, which he was known at the time. He was 12 years old.
Little. Right.
Little Stevie Wonder recorded a piece called Fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with this incredible drum solo. And Stevie Wonder's addressing the crowd, and here's the write-up. Writing for You Discovered Music, Paul Sexton wrote, 12-year-old genius at work, Stevie Wonder debuts by his fingertips. And in the piece he writes, the name of the song is called Fingertips, Stevie Wonder told the crowd. I want you to clap your hands, stomp your feet, jump up and down. It's just a celebration of joy. The track kicks in with a drum figure played by a young Motown house musician by the name of Marvin Gaye.
Who ever heard of that guy?
I mean, wonderful musicians, wonderful people, wonderful movie. I heard other stuff happen too, but, this is what caught my attention.
Yeah, well, that's a bright spot to focus on. Why not? And I missed it because, I missed the whole Oscars. And then, of course, the only thing I would find out is the sensational and damaging news. But this is good. Nice and uplifting news. And Denise Oliver in it, too, huh? Okay.
Yeah, so go watch it, folks. It's
I guess
good.
I will now.
And that's what you should remember from the Oscars.
It's another $9.99 to some streaming service that I already pay something else for. But probably the case. But if I wait long enough, it'll come down in price. Okay. Or if the $9.99 goes to Denise, I'm in. Okay.
Anyway, that's my report for today.
That's
some
good.
of the stuff that happened over the weekend. But, this Ginny Thomas thing is like big.
It is.
I could give you another 3 or 4 stories on it. Will Bunch wrote a good one, for example.
Sure, send them over because we have to cover it more in depth.
Okay.
I'll do that part. I'll do the reading.
Okay. Well, let me send you 2 then. I'll give you
I'm not going to do this.
Grand Sergeant's Morning Joe shock over Ginny Thomas truth.
Shock.
Okay. Right. There's that one. And let me find the Will Bunch one. Oh, there it is. Something deeply disturbing about the Ginny Thomas mess beyond a crazy text and any link to Clarence. All of it, justice for Trump, J6, sanity seems to be headed off a cliff. We're losing SCOTUS and with it America.
Okay. He packs
That's
a lot
his
more
point.
panic into that headline than Greg does.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's that. So,
all right, cool.
If you want to,
I do.
You have stuff you can do.
Right. All right. Well, I appreciate it.
I'm out of here. I'll see you Wednesday.
All right. Get out of here, boy. I slap you one.
And here's your sound check.
Okay. Thanks very much, Greg. I appreciate it. There's a lot to go over, of course. Yeah, Ginny, what did I put away? I'm going to see what else I have on Ginny Thomas. It's all buried now. It's funny because that happened on Thursday night, I guess the story broke, and I finally read about it on Friday morning, and I was away from the show. I had pre-recorded, of course. I knew something crazy would happen that would, it's good sometimes when that happens, because then when you notice that I'm not talking about it, you realize, oh, this is a pre-recorded show. But we were away for a college visit with our youngest, and over breakfast before the program began, I was reading through Twitter and realizing, oh, wow, hey, she's a real piece of work, I guess, is what you used to say in the day. She's quite crazy. There's the straight news stories of them, but by now you will have heard the basics of things, although, sometimes I think it's worth rereading those things just to get... the initial news stories are the ones that'll have all the quotes from the craziest of the texts and the tweets, and it's sometimes worth reiterating that. But I think you've probably read all of that. We'll skip at this point, fast forward to the analysis part that will put us in the proper frame of mind for being outraged about such things. So that's why I was hoping. And I got Greg's contributions here from Will Bunch and Greg Sargent. And we'll, I guess, skip to that part. We may have to go back and examine the factual reporting that came out on Thursday night and Friday morning, but perhaps later on in our digestion of the stories. Okay, we're taking our 1 minute break. We'll be right back. We got a minute to reset. Thanks to Greg for carrying us all the way to the top of the hour. We'll be back to shock your conscience next. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. I guess we could really spend the next hour on a bunch of interconnected stories about the crazy and Republicans. And I think you could probably fill hours and hours with that. Let's see. First of all, though, I guess by way of getting around to the Ginny Thomas story. Like I said, you probably all know the story, the basics of it. We'll read some of the commentary to set this up. But, yeah, she's into the craziest of the crazy of the ballot fraud and QAnon-style things. I mean, the idea of her tweeting those or texting those messages to Meadows about watermarks and ballots, that's bamboo in the ballots level Arizona audit crazy. And the rest of the reporting of the weekend was, well, how much influence does she really have over Thomas? There were some people trying to, I don't know, Thomas defenders pushing back. Oh, well, he's smart enough to know to separate those things, but it's nonsense. It's garbage. Of course they talk. Of course they communicate. And of course it's reflected in his rulings too. It doesn't make any sense to say that the two of them keep their affairs separate. And lots of reporting about exactly how much influence she has over him. And it becomes obvious if you look at the way he rules on a number of things. And somebody had put together, I think it was Robert Costa, as a matter of fact. Let's see, I'll have to make a note to myself to look for the Costa tweet in which he was basically laying that case out in putting together a timeline of Ginny Thomas's activities and communications with Meadows and the rulings Thomas was making at the same time on the same subject. Greg sends a great picture. Where'd this come from? You just tweeted this thing so that I can, I got to share it in the roundup, but somebody has put a printout sign in the tin foil aisle. It's aluminum foil, of course, really, but why do we say tin? I'm not really sure, but it's a holdover from the days, I guess. Did they make it originally from tin, or was it just a mistake? Anyway, in the aluminum foil section of the supermarket here, it's a sign taped to the shelves underneath the Reynolds wrap here. No knock on Reynolds wrap. They're no crazier than anybody else. Free hat in every box. That's pretty much what's going on here. She's she's a real loopy idiot. I don't know. But in light of what we read, or what I read to you, let's see, this would have been about last Tuesday that I read this to you, but it was for Friday's broadcast, so it's fresher in your mind. But in the middle of discussing all this, we should keep in mind the distinct possibility that it's not necessarily a genuinely held belief by Ginny Thomas or any of these other people, though it's very easy to believe she's just a complete kook and really does believe this stuff. But we're reminded constantly by Amanda Marcotte and others that you shouldn't, not only are they not arguing in good faith about the substance, if you can call it that, of their arguments, but they're not even arguing in good faith in the sense that they believe what they're saying necessarily. So sometimes that's difficult to reconcile all of this stuff. But whether you believe it or not, the fact that you're saying it should be, roughly disqualifying for participation in polite society. And yet she participates at an extraordinary level in polite society. All right, so what did Will Bunch have to say? I guess there's a tweet thread that he sent us, and it links to his larger piece. Something is deeply disturbing about the Ginny Thomas mess, beyond her crazy texts and any link to Clarence. All of it. Justice for Trump and J6, January 6th, Senate sanity, all seems to be headed off a cliff. We are losing SCOTUS, and with it America. That's the intro to his new column. And let's see, he excerpts it for us as well. But maybe we could read it's not gigantic, according to the little scroll bar here, if I open it up. It's in the Philadelphia Inquirer, of course. The Supreme Court has a giant legitimacy crisis, which means so does America. You get the connection, of course. It's one of our branches of government. The runaway Supreme Court facing a massive conflict of interest scandal and increasing politicization of testing. Faith in the American experiment. How so, Will? Here's his answer. Earlier this month, a speech warning about the dangers of politicizing the U.S. Supreme Court was delivered in Utah by an authoritative insider source who cautioned that at some point the institution is going to be compromised. He voiced his growing concern that eventually we could, quote, chip away at the respect of the institutions that the next generation is going to need if they're going to have civil society. The next generation should be very, very afraid. The speaker was Justice Clarence Thomas, the longest-serving member of the High Court, and that his words were delivered inside a swank hotel to benefit a foundation run by a partisan Republican who'd played a key role in shifting the court rightward, former Senator Orrin Hatch, was neither the biggest irony nor the most outrageous. Less than 2 weeks later, D.C. journalists Bob Woodward, yes, the Watergate Bob Woodward, and Robert Costa, who seems to all accounts, being readied as his protege and successor, perhaps, published a bombshell scoop about a lengthy series of politically explosive text messages that the justice's wife, Virginia, or Ginny Thomas, well known in the Capitol as a right-wing activist, sent to Donald Trump's then top aide, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who was illegally registered to vote at an address that was not his own. I hasten to add. The messages show that between President Biden's November 2020 election victory and the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the Capitol, Ginny Thomas was aggressively lobbying the White House to overturn the result, a battle that might well have ended up before her husband's Supreme Court. And that's the big problem. On so many different levels, the Ginny Thomas-Meadows communications are deeply disturbing. The most immediate question is arguably the most specific one. Is Justice Thomas's integrity tainted by all of this? There's no clear indication from the text that Ginny Thomas took up her unsupported claims of election fraud with her husband. Her one allusion to, quote, my best friend, the top Thomas watchers like the New Yorker's Jane Meyer say that's almost certainly Clarence, isn't overtly political. We do know, however, that Justice Thomas was the court's lone vote against turning over key Trump records to the House committee investigating January 6th, A vote many experts in legal ethics find troubling, as do I and many regular folks, especially if, for instance, it might turn out to be the case that the records he was against turning over might in fact contain evidence incriminating of his wife, and she may have told him that, and he may have said, no, I vote against that, even though it was useless to do so. She may have said to him, well, I want you to go and slap that guy across the face because they're insulting me by investigating my activities, even if it's ultimately futile. All right, let's see. Greg, by the way, sending me some more material and more messages, and now I'm curious about what that is. He says, according to CBS This Morning's Twitter feed, a growing number of Democrats are calling on Justice Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from the 2020 election-related cases after text messages revealed his wife, Ginny Thomas, supported overturning the results. That, too, will be largely futile, but they do have to be on the record in saying that and calling for it. And, of course, I remind you that there are there's no method of enforcing ethics rules on members of the Supreme Court short of impeaching them. Because, of course, he'll interpret the ethics rules not to require his recusal, and then he won't recuse, and there's no one you can appeal to. It's the Supreme Court. They just simply say, not going to do it. And then you either say that's impeachment worthy or it isn't, and you either have the votes to do something about it or you don't, and they don't. Anyway, back to Will Bunch. Where were we? Yes, right. Saying that, there's obviously, the obvious issue is, does Ginny Thomas have influence over Clarence Thomas? And, of course, she does. Yet there's something else about the Ginny Thomas texts that people find distressing, even though it's arguably not illegal. That's the unhinged content of her writing. In one text, the wife of a sitting Supreme Court justice, and you wonder, where would she turn if she wanted solid legal advice about real legal issues? And the answer can't be Clarence Thomas because he don't know either. But anyway, the unhinged content of her writing. In one text, the wife of a sitting Supreme Court justice claimed that members of what she called, quote, the Biden crime family were en route to barges near the Guantanamo Bay prison camp awaiting military trials for sedition. An idea that circulated only in the online world of QAnon, not in any reality-based circles. That was a very widely repeated trope of theirs, that they're, whatever the enemy of the moment was, that the real truth, that the media, the mainstream media wouldn't tell you, but you as an insider to the QAnon world, you're getting the tip over, forward email or whatever, is that what they don't want you to know is that the people you dislike are right now being arrested by the forces of good in the world and being shipped to Guantanamo. And how many times did that happen? And how many times did people say, I just saw him on TV. He's not in Guantanamo. Oh, no, that's a body double. The real Joe Biden is definitely rotting in a prison barge in Guantanamo. Well, then why does the body double, who's been apparently arranged for by QAnon to cover up the swiftness with which they're acting, and why are they covering that up? I'm not really sure. But the forces that, the powers that be, require that we keep things on an even keel. We don't want to upset the stock market, but we're definitely wanting to punish this satanic vampire pedophile zombie guy who's president of the United States. So we arranged for a body double, and oddly enough, the body double that we have inserted into government and as a replacement for the real Joe Biden is carrying out policy we cannot stand and want to have a revolution to overthrow, which is weird because we really should have we should have given the instructions to the body double to implement policy that we prefer so that we could, sit back and relax. But I don't know. We love a challenge. Is that why we're supposed to believe that they did it? Anyway, she was one of those kooks that believed that the real truth was that they were in fact all being arrested immediately. And if it didn't happen, it was because, it's a false flag thing or body doubles or yada yada. Ginny Thomas also sent Meadows a link to a a since-deleted YouTube video. And it works to say science-deleted YouTube. You know, all science has been deleted from this thinking. YouTube video with false election fraud claims from a QAnon-friendly right-wing conspiracy theorist who was previously referred to the 2012 mass murder of children in Newtown, Connecticut, you know, the one, as a false flag operation. You know where he did that. Of course, that would have been on the Alex Jones show. I have read some other commentary over the weekend that suggests that the guy behind this, who I forget his name off the top of my head, but Greg mentioned his name. It'll come up again earlier today. He was a frequent InfoWars guest with, Alex Jones and all the other weirdos who host InfoWars. I guess they have a whole lineup. But he's also at times found himself banned, or at least briefly banned from InfoWars as, they were pitching it, too crazy for Alex Jones. But I forget specifically what it was that he was alleging that even Alex Jones, even the liberal Alex Jones, says wasn't true. Anyway, there was an endless stream of chatter on social media this weekend about the Ginny Thomas file, yet folks had a hard time pinning a name on the great angst they were feeling. I'll take a stab at it. The majority of Americans, the people who gave more votes to Hillary Clinton in 2016 and even more to Biden in 2020 and put the Democrats back in nominal control of Congress, are still, despite those victories, watching the car careen off the cliff. And we are unable to find the brakes. There seems to be no way or no will to hold our staggeringly corrupt leaders accountable, whether it's Trump defrauding the banks or plotting an attempted coup from the Oval Office, or a Supreme Court justice ruling on his wife's bat guano, thank you very much, crazy political crusade. And there's seemingly no way to stop the crazy, like QAnon, from getting crazier. I'm in a total funk over the State of the Union. And when I wrote that on Twitter, hundreds of people agreed with me. Well, it's easy to feel that. That's certainly the case. Didn't you say you were going to give a name to it or something? And then I don't think you did that. But anyway, you gave us the feeling of it. And that's quite enough. But yeah, and by the way, just for a brief pause on a comment on this thing, there seems to be no way or will to hold our staggeringly corrupt leaders accountable, whether it's Trump defrauding the banks or defrauding the country or the attempted coup. You can't even get him you can't even go forward with civil proceedings over his defrauding banks, which was the hallmark of a 50-year career. And they still can't seem to do this to him. It's really quite upsetting. But, that was the idea, right? You run for president to become a politician, and then it's like there are certain people we won't hold accountable, which some of you are probably also thinking about, still thinking about it, despite my effort to distract you away from it. The issue of the Oscars last night, this is still on my mind. I said I wasn't going to comment on it, but, a lot of people noting that, once again, here, a brazen assault has taken place in broad daylight, and without getting into the problems of whether or not anyone was right or wrong about it, even though it's pretty clear what was going on. The fact is that, a pretty obvious assault taking place in front of, millions, if you count television, witnesses. And apparently, did they cut away from it in some way? Because it's sort of delayed stream on the broadcast here in the United States. But I guess in foreign coverage, they don't do that because they want to see everything as it happens. I don't know why we get the delayed one and everybody else doesn't. But I guess we're just weird here. And but the rest of the world, I guess, saw this slap. And then we all saw the video of it eventually because there's no containing it. They shouldn't even bother trying to, clamp down on things here with the delay, given that even if they manage to keep it off the air, someone in Japan will videotape the screen and tweet it around in 10 seconds. So you might as well stop trying. But at any rate, I was thinking about the fact that, that too, everyone's talking about it. It's a blatant assault in front of everyone, and there will be no police involvement in it and no prosecution or anything. And there's a whole bunch of other issues. This is why I didn't really want to get into the story of it, but lots wrapped up in why that's not happening. But, it does make you wonder, like, are there just some people that, the initial reaction, both among the Hollywood stars and the regular folks just watching at home, like, you can't really conceive of this being referred to the criminal justice system and Will Smith being arrested and prosecuted and processed as a regular, everyday street criminal. It would be shocking to his, to his fans and detractors alike, I think, for some reason. And, a lot of people did make this comparison and say, by the way, the paralysis in the reaction in the room, outside of the room, in the criminal justice system, in society in general, after this event is a little bit, this helps explain how we all sat there and watched Trump do the things he did and get away with the things he got away with, and decided to say, I can't prove 100% that we really should be doing something here, so let's just continue to debate it. There's a lot of validity to that. That's all the extraction from last night's events, I think, that I want to take from all this. But where were we with this? Yes, we were talking about the Supreme Court and its growing illegitimacy, as he puts it here. Will Bunch continues, the growing illegitimacy of the Supreme Court in particular feels like the downward slide of U.S. democracy is crossing the Rubicon. Like the greater American experiment, the High Court has been deeply flawed at times. And you probably don't need much of a reminder to figure that out, but it's here in case you want it. Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson leap to mind. Yet there was much residual goodwill from the expanded civil rights and generally, though not always, more bipartisan confirmation hearings of the mid-20th century. I'm already getting complaint letters that Korematsu is not included among the things that leapt to mind, but it wasn't my mind, it was Will Bunch's, and he's thinking of it now too, I assure you. The Supreme Court has long held greater public trust than comparable institutions like Congress, but its numbers are plummeting. The court's September 2021 Gallup poll approval rating of 40% is an all-time low. The average citizen views today's Supreme Court as highly politicized because Armando tells you that it should be viewed that way, and he's right. But Will says because we all saw what our politicians did to it. That's true. So did Armando. He just told you. Anyway, the Republican political hardball and the brazen dishonesty that was used to justify it Trumpified the court with 3 out of 9 justices, 1 stolen from the first black president, 1 rammed through just days before the 2020 election, and 1 with a surprise resignation. Now, no one is shocked that a court forged with such political bad faith is making bad decisions with nakedly political overtones. There's been a kind of frog in boiling water effect, and don't write about whether or not that aphorism, is that the right word for it, is really true. But there's been a kind of frog in boiling water effect with the gradual erosion of the High Court's moral authority. As America's political divide becomes more contentious, advocates increasingly look to block new laws or maneuvers like 2022's redrawing of legislative districts in the courts, and the Supreme Court is increasingly dealing with these through what's known as the shadow docket. These are emergency orders issued without the usual oral arguments or deliberations, often issued without an announced vote tally or the normal written opinions. The shadow docket has allowed justices to make major decisions with speed and obscurity, and you won't be shocked to learn that under the Trump court, these decisions have skewed more and more to the right. The latest shadow docket uproar came just last week when the Supreme Court sided with Republicans in Wisconsin, making a last-minute push to block a new state legislative map that they considered unfriendly. The court's emergency order, like some other recent shadow docket decisions, seemed to fly in the face of other recent rulings, but there was little transparency for the public to understand its reasoning. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, one of the 3 remaining liberals on the court, did write a dissent stating that the court's action today is unprecedented and her sense of frustration is increasingly common. Most court watchers say preserving the court's eroding legitimacy remains a front-burner issue for Chief Justice John Roberts, who's occasionally surprised the public by upholding Obamacare or with other centrist votes, while the court's 2015 decision enshrining gay marriage did reflect changing public views on social issues. But where the rubber hits the road on the crucial issues like big money in politics or voting rights, with the health of U.S. democracy on the docket, the conservative Roberts-Trump court has steadily pushed America toward the abyss. Okay. All of these things, the rightward drift punctuated by that Mitch McConnell engineered theft of an open seat in 2016, and now the ethical crisis triggered by the Thomases, have contributed to dread over the big issues the court is now hearing. The most notable one involves a Mississippi law banning abortions after 15 weeks, where it appears likely the court will severely weaken or even overturn the Roe v. Wade decision granting reproductive rights, even as polls show as many as 72% of Americans oppose undoing that landmark 1973 ruling. That same survey, by the way, found voters losing overall trust in the Supreme Court. It felt fitting that the High Court's legitimacy crisis was reaching a crescendo right in the middle of the fraught confirmation for a new justice, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Her ascension, likely to occur on close to a straight party line vote, could have been a reaffirming moment, with KBJ, as we're now calling her, bringing experience, a sharp legal mind, and most important, new perspectives as a former public defender and as the first black woman in Supreme Court history. Instead, the hearings were a tawdry showcase for Republican senators to spout some of the same QAnon-flavored nonsense that seems to have poisoned Ginny Thomas's brain, and a reminder of how a toxic right-wing movement has slowly been infecting our justice system for decades. So, what's the answer? The left's favorite solution is expanding the court to somewhere between 11 and 15 justices, and is, in my opinion, this is Will Bunch, intellectually supported by the McConnell power grab, but it's also highly unlikely and would only worsen the public perception that the Supreme Court has become a political animal. Term limits for justices could be more easily justified and could curb the life or death flavor of these confirmation battles, but again, it's hard to see radical changes getting enacted in such a divided Washington. In the Clarence Thomas matter, impeachment would A, probably require proof that Ginny Thomas lobbied her husband, and good luck with that. B, fail to win a Senate conviction just like Trump's impeachments. And C, probably bring America closer to a civil war. What's realistic? Chief Justice Roberts could take his supposed concern about the court's public standing and put his foot down on Justice Thomas to recuse himself in any future cases involving January 6th or other matters tied to his wife's advocacy. That's not much. It's the bare minimum. But at least it would begin to turn the damaged aircraft carrier that is the Supreme Court's legitimacy in the right direction, and perhaps buy some time to build the needed support for real and lasting reform to what has become a runaway chamber. Time's running out because the post-Trump GOP movement to erode the integrity of elections all but ensures that between now and 2025, the 9 justices will be ruling on the continued existence of American democracy. That ruling will fail without the public's trust, and as of right now, the Supreme Court doesn't have it. Interesting perspective, to say the very least. Now, there's more to add to it, and I'll jump back into Pocket, but maybe I should also, by the way, begin looking for that Robert Costa tweet. Is he just Robert Costa on, all like one word on, or does he have some sort of other, I can't remember what his Twitter handle is, but I'm sure I can probably look at it. There it is. Costa Reports. So we're looking for, has he been tweeting a lot lately? Probably, right? Because he's pretty busy with this story. Oh, and it was his, he also retweeted the CBS Morning News tweet that Greg shared with us recently about more and more Democrats calling for him to recuse. But let's see. Will I find it right away? No, I guess he's been having a busy weekend tweeting because it's a big story for him. But let's see. If it's Costa Reports. And let's see. November. Yeah, so he had a whole timeline. There it is. March 26th piece. Oh, and here comes our break, too. So we can squeeze in this tweet, and I can put it away here in Pocket for the November 20, that is not the 20th, but November of 2020. Thomas' spouse, that's Ginny, engages White House chief of staff on legal strategy as Trump pursues court hearing And in January of 21, former Thomas clerk Eastman pushes the memo on the VP. Then in February of 2021, Thomas dissents from the court's rejection of Trump's challenges. January of 22, Thomas dissents on rejection of Trump's request on records. And he goes on basically laying out this timeline. And his thread then leads to a couple of his other pieces here. But basically laying out his supposition that, she's been talking to him, and that's why he rules the way he does. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, what was the other thing that Greg had sent? There was, there's more even. Greg Sargent and Josh Marshall on all of this. Josh Marshall is being quoted at the top of the Pundit Roundup, the abbreviated Pundit Roundup. So was that intended to be added to the pile here? What did we want to read about Josh Marshall's discussion of? I think so. All right, let's see. We'll do it in this order. We'll do Greg Sargent first, then Josh Marshall, and then you'll have known what all the bespectacled oracles have to say, and you'll be caught up on the story, and you'll be outraged. And then we'll add some of the peripheral stories. Let's see. There's the Greg Sargent piece here. Morning Joe shock over Ginny Thomas points to a hidden January 6th truth. Let's go see if it's actually been hidden from us or not, or whether we say, oh, yeah, that one. No, that wasn't hidden. We knew that one. We'll see. Sometimes it's about 50-50 sometimes in these stories. Buried in the explosive news that Virginia Thomas aggressively advocated for Donald Trump's coup attempt is a choice revelation. The spouse of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas texted with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows about Jesus Christ's otherworldly role in delivering the election to Trump. Aha. Guilty as charged, Jesus Christ. I didn't know that. But okay, Meadows texted to Ginny Thomas that the King of Kings would ultimately triumph in the quest to overturn the election, which Meadows characterized as a fight of good versus evil. Thomas, a longtime conservative activist, replied, "Thank you. Needed that." This sparked serious consternation on Morning Joe, with host Joe Scarborough delivering an emotional diatribe about it. "Think about the sickness of this," Scarborough said Friday. "He summons the name of Jesus Christ for his help in overturning American democracy. And boy, will I be mad at Jesus if that happens." The sentiment is understandable, but what this level of shock really indicates is this: we haven't paid enough attention to the role of right-wing Christian nationalism in driving Trump's effort to destroy our political order, and in the abandonment of democracy among some on the right more broadly. No. Well, I don't know. Peter Manso has, and he's upset, I think, probably rightly so. He's been writing about it, and we've been reading about it on the show for quite some time as a result of his fine writing on the subject. So we're probably not surprised about this. But yeah, I would say it's a good point and worth making. Just as we have been exhorting our Democratic representatives in the elected branch, look, you guys really have to get up to speed on where this crazy is coming from and know that more is coming. They're all in on the Q thing, whether they believe it, as some people say, or that they don't, which is just as bad, as Amanda Marcotte and others say. You need to get up to speed on what's happening here. Similarly, the involvement of religious right-wing influences and the belief that they're doing, they really think they're doing the Lord's work here in all of this. But that too should be no surprise. I mean, we shouldn't have to tutor you in the fact that all sorts of people always are convinced that God is on their side in all of this. But okay, an important point being made here. In invoking Jesus' support for Trump's effort to overturn the election, Meadows, who handled evangelical outreach at the White House, was not merely making an offhand comment. He was speaking in a vein that has held wide currency among the Christian nationalist right throughout the Trump years, right through the insurrection attempt. Manso has been concentrating of late on the influence of the Christian right and of Christian nationalism on January 6th and the overtness with which they made themselves and their presence known there, and that they very much felt that they were the ones driving the agenda that day. Whether they were or not, they certainly believed that they were. And, he hasn't been ignoring this. Anyway, Sarah Posner, a scholar of the Christian right, has extensively documented the role of that movement in supporting and lending grassroots energy to the effort to overturn the election procedurally and even in fomenting the insurrection itself. The rhetoric from the Christian right about Trump has long sounded very much like that exchange between Meadows and Thomas. In a piece tracing that rhetoric, Posner concludes that for many on the Christian right, Trump was, quote, anointed by God as, quote, the fulfillment of a long-sought goal of restoring the United States as a Christian nation, which it never was, but whatever. And by the way, you see it in everything, even the now abandoned People's Convoy driving around in circles on the Beltway around Washington, D.C. accomplishes nothing, but it makes them feel like they're accomplishing something, especially if they pretend it has something to do with the biblical Battle of Jericho. We're circling the city 7 times and then leaving, which is not how Jericho went, but whatever. The point is we're going around in circles, and so did people in the Bible, and so therefore we're in the Bible, and we're awesome. I mean, that's what it comes down to, I guess. In this narrative, Trump, despite his glaring and repugnant personal imperfections, became the vessel to carry out the struggle to defeat various godless and secularist infestations of the idealized Christian nation, from the woke to globalists to communists to the deep state. This culminated with the effort to overturn the election and the lead up to the January 6th rally that morphed into the mob assault. As Posner documents, Christian right activists developed a bellicose Christian narrative in defense of Trump's coup attempt, investing it with biblical significance and casting it as a holy war against an illegitimate state, which is probably what ISIS thinks of itself as doing, or for that matter, Al-Qaeda, or because of the same, or whatever. The illegitimate state, of course, is our democracy. And so when Thomas and Meadows text about the religious dimensions of the coup attempt, they're echoing much of what we've long heard from the Christian right about it. Evil always looks like the victor until the King of Kings triumphs, Meadows texted to Thomas. Do not grow weary. Thomas, who played a key role in trying to subvert Trump's loss as a leader of a group that included various Christian right elements, sounded similarly messianic tones in her text. She invoked the need to stand firm with the, quote, great president whose might and glory were keeping America from plunging into the precipice. Meadows' text to Thomas and her grateful and enthusiastic reply demonstrates how the pair saw themselves as soldiers in this spiritual battle from which they should never retreat, Posner told me, adding that this is representative of rhetoric that has long permeated Trump's base. To be fair, some Christian voices roundly condemned the January 6th violence, but on the day itself, there were many Christian symbols of various kinds throughout the Stop the Steal rally crowd, as Robert Jones, the founder and CEO of Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, has documented. The evidence for white Christian nationalism's importance to the effort to overthrow the election was right before our eyes on January 6th, Jones told me. It was in the signs that were carried. It brought a veneer of divine blessing on the violence and the insurrection. Christian nationalism has at different times focused on varying enemies of its vision of a Christian nation, but the through line here is that multidenominational, multiracial democracy is producing a country that is unacceptable to the Christian nationalist vision, Jones notes, which is why reckoning with the role of this movement in its turn against democracy is important. It is a violent reclamation movement, Jones told me. If we're going to move into the promise of a multi-religious, multi-ethnic democracy, these forces are going to have to be confronted. In his diatribe about Meadows' invocation of Jesus, Scarborough said, "He's right. It was a fight between good and evil. He's just got the jerseys mixed up." Scarborough repeated that this is a, quote, sickness, but this movement runs a whole lot deeper than Meadows and Thomas, and it isn't going anywhere. Good warning. No mention of Manso, although I think he's probably worked with some of the people who were mentioned in putting his project together. Anyway, just wanted to point that out, and I guess we should pay some closer attention to what Peter's up to these days and read another of his pieces as the opportunity presents itself. Let's see. Then there was the piece that Greg put at the top of the abbreviated pundit roundup, an excerpt from Josh Marshall writing at TPM. Let's get real about Ginny and Clarence Thomas. And jumping right in the middle here. But all of this, I would say, dances around the real issue that I think all of us understand. Ginny Thomas obviously discussed all of this with her husband. We can pretend not to know this, but we do. It was very clear that much of this controversy would or could end up before the Supreme Court. I mean, it was overtly part of the plan, right? It's in the Eastman memos that we can take this all the way up to the Supreme Court, and basically we can do the gimmitarianism thing, and if we can get a 6-3 ruling, there's no appeal from it, and all the things that everybody thought they understood about the Constitution are pretty wrong, right? Pence doesn't have the power to do this, and he doesn't. But, of course, if 6 justices get together and say, without explanation, we find that the vice president does have that power, what do you do about it? No, you're wrong, you're just making it up. Yeah, well, so what? Who are you going to appeal to? This is the end of the line. From now on, that's the way it works. Well, you wouldn't want that power to be in Kamala Harris's hands in 2025, would you? No, we wouldn't, which is why we'll take it away from her and not put it in her hands in 2025. But that's contradictory. I know, but to whom are you going to cry about this contradiction? The Supreme Court? No. I don't think so. And unfortunately, the only answer there is the one that gets your content taken down. If I told you the answer to how you solve that dilemma, YouTube wouldn't publish this thing, and Twitter would be kicking me off, and I'd be off the back pages at Daily Kos as well. So, But I think you know what the answer to that is, because it's the only answer there is. I mean, it's not new or shocking or anything. Benjamin Franklin said as much coming out of the Constitutional Convention. Look, the reason we put impeachment in here, and now that is now rendered, a nullity. They never really, I guess they didn't really think too hard about this stuff. But, partisan politics wasn't as clear an issue to them as it should have been, even as parties were forming. They were hoping they wouldn't, but they totally were. And even if without parties, I mean, there were lines, battle lines in the Continental Congress and in the Constitutional Convention and in Congress afterwards. It was pretty clear what was happening. But, they put out there, look, if we don't, when they debated whether or not to have impeachment included in the Constitution, they basically said, well, look, if there's no recourse for wild wrongdoing in whatever branch, then the only recourse is the one we've had historically to getting rid of people who hold absolute power, and that's, in England it's been executing the king occasionally, or it happens from time to time. The only solution is violence. So to the extent you hope to avoid it, you got to put a more peaceful and orderly transition mechanism in the the Constitution. But when you void that by saying it doesn't matter what your violation is, if you are on my team, I'm going to vote with you. And as long as, if it takes the other team winning 2/3 of the seats in the Senate in order to do anything about it, that's a pretty good guarantee that nothing is ever going to happen. So, let's just go hog wild here. Do what you want to do. The Supreme Court will be on our side. And the only thing you can do to correct that is to impeach them. And again, as I just said, that's not going to happen. But again, I remind you that the only solution to that, well, one solution, I guess, would be to expand the court. But since that's not going to happen, and although you only need 60 votes to do that, that's somewhat more attainable, I guess, than the 67. But short of that, you're just going to have to sit there and take it, unless you're going to avail yourself of this other possible solution. Although how you're going to be able to organize people to get behind it, I don't know, because you're not allowed to talk about it. Okay, back to Josh Marshall here, who's not getting himself in this trouble. So, all this dances around the real issue that I understand. Ginny Thomas obviously discussed all this with her husband. We can pretend not to know this, but we do. It was very clear that much of this controversy would or could end up before the Supreme Court. After all, this all turns on the fundamental laws of the state, which only the Supreme Court can arbitrate. Is there anything about these texts, either their substance or their effect, that tells you, oh, well, she clearly felt strongly about this, but she would know not to broach the subject with her husband or push him on it? Oh, of course not. These texts are from someone who is fully feral, invoking God, a pitched battle between good and evil, and more. Of course, she talked about it with her husband. She thinks Joe Biden is an illegitimate interloper, and for the first time in a quarter millennium, patriots must overturn an election and install the loser in office. It's a rare event, right? Install the loser in office, and she's going to be mindful of not discussing the matter with her husband. That's clearly absurd, especially since her husband was on the bench for the last installation of an illegitimate interloper and the loser being installed in office, right? Given what we know about their politics-saturated marriage, entirely common in D.C., and their shared political activism, which has been very public for decades, it's all but a certainty, not only that the two discussed it extensively, but that the two were on the same page. You think we don't know that? Give me a break. And, well, that sums it up. And it gave us a chance to discuss the reality of the situation in ways, we had to do a lot of dancing around the bottom line, but you know what we're talking about here. Let's see. I said there were a couple other peripheral stories out there, and there are. Let's see. Which one shall we share with you? Why don't we try this one first, because it seems the more important of the two. Ian Millhiser, writing at Vox. It has much to do directly with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rules that Joe Biden is commander-in-chief. Isn't that great? It's good to know that they reaffirmed that, and you'll see exactly what this is about in just a second. But note for the record, it says right here in the headline, 3 justices dissent. So it was a 6-3 ruling, and, ordinarily that means it comes out the wrong way. But this time it came out the right way because there were still a couple of justices, even conservative ones, who were unwilling to completely, subsume themselves to this agenda right away. It was too embarrassing for them to rule that, no, he's not the commander-in-chief, because it is like literally black and white in there in the Constitution. And you know how they're always saying textualism, the actual text of the Constitution matters. And, yes, they can be gimmitarian about it and rule that it's not the case when Joe Biden is the president, but it is the case when a Republican or Trump or any Republican is president. And they will do that. But it wasn't necessary for them to do so right now, I guess. But 3 justices, 3 actual real justices, out of the 5 you would need to win, still say, I am ready to do that. So what's going on here? Ian Millhiser writes this story up for you at Vox. As I said, the Supreme Court on Friday evening, no less, decided no, it wasn't going to needlessly insert itself in the military chain of command above President Joe Biden. The court's decision in Austin versus U.S. Navy SEALs 1 through 26, I guess there are 26 of them suing, largely halted a lower court order that permitted certain sailors, SEALs in fact, to defy a direct order. That sounds like a weird case, doesn't it? Of course, you could probably guess what it's about. You may just do not have to guess. You might actually know. A group of Navy Special Operations personnel, SEALs, sought an exemption from the Pentagon's requirement that all active duty service members get vaccinated against COVID-19. Yes, claiming that they should receive a religious exemption. Well, I'm sorry. If you have religious objections to the way we fight wars, you don't belong in the military. And there are such things, conscientious objectors and everything, but they don't join the military and cost us all that money training them as SEALs just so that they can declare themselves tough guys and go fight for, Jesus and Trump somewhere. You're supposed to be fighting for us. And this is the way you're supposed to do it. A majority of the court effectively ruled that, yes, in fact, troops do have to follow orders, including an order to take a vaccine. That's not supposed to be a surprise. The decision is undeniably a win for the balance of power between the executive branch and the judiciary that has prevailed for many decades. But the fact that the court had to weigh in on this at all, not to mention that 3 justices, and can you guess who they are? Justices Clarence Thomas, that deserves dramatic music. One we were just talking about. Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, who's killing everybody with his vaccine mandate opposition, and Neil Gorsuch dissented from the majority. That is a worrisome sign about America's judiciary. It's another one. As Justice Brett Kavanaugh explained in a brief opinion laying out why the lower court erred, this court, quote, in effect, inserted itself into the Navy's chain of command, overriding military commanders' professional military judgments. Had the court ruled the other way in SEALs, it, in other words, had 2 other justices, just 2, joined Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, like, say, Kavanaugh and Comey, maybe, could have done it. Then the opposite would have obtained. Had the court ruled the other way in SEALs, it would have effectively placed itself at the apex of the military's chain of command, displacing Biden as commander-in-chief. But as Kavanaugh, believe it or not, correctly notes in his concurring opinion, there is a long line of Supreme Court precedents establishing that courts should be exceedingly reluctant to interfere with military affairs, probably based on the textual command that the president be recognized as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, right in the Constitution. In Gilligan versus Morgan, not Gilligan versus Skipper, but Gilligan versus Morgan, the less popular, a 1973 case. But in 73, Gilligan versus the Skipper and Gilligan versus Thurston Howell III, very important cases. But in Gilligan versus Morgan, for example, the court held that the complex, subtle, and professional decisions as to the composition, training, equipping, and control of a military force are essentially professional military judgments, and that it is difficult to conceive of an area of governmental activity in which the courts have less competence. Nevertheless, Judge Reed O'Connor, a notoriously partisan judge in Texas who is best known for a failed effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act, ruled in favor of the service members who refused to follow a direct order. And the conservative United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit refused the Navy's request to stay key parts of O'Connor's order. That left the responsibility of restoring the military's proper chain of command to the Supreme Court. Though the court's order does not wipe out O'Connor's decision in its entirety, it temporarily blocks that decision insofar as it precludes the Navy from considering respondents' vaccination status and making deployment, assignment, and other operational decisions. But the astounding thing about the SEALs order is that the Supreme Court needed to intervene in this case at all. And before we even go on, I have to remind you at this point, all that's happened here is that the Supreme Court stays O'Connor's order, or at least key parts of it, and says, O'Connor, the Supreme Court says, don't forget the president and the Pentagon, are the actual commanders here. And yes, you have to follow orders if you're in the military. And no, you can't rely on the Supreme Court to say, well, we're angry about COVID-19 vaccinations, and so therefore F the Constitution. You got to do the right thing. You need to know. You're now ordered to reissue your order in compliance with our decision. And O'Connor may or may not be the kind of judge who says, oh, yeah, make me. And finds either, if he's conscientious about his job, which he's probably not, he'll try and find some other fake-ass legal reasoning why. Well, for a different reason, I still want to issue the same order. And if he's just plain gimmitarian, he'll just say, you say I need to reconsider it. I've reconsidered it and you're wrong. Here's my order again. And we might have to go through this whole thing again. I mean, that is possible. It's not supposed to be possible. And lawyers everywhere, constitutional lawyers, are saying, no, it doesn't work like that. I know it doesn't work like that, but it might be what he does anyway, at which point, the Supreme Court will likely, I guess, say, we made it pretty clear. I'm sorry, it was 6-3. You're just wrong. And ignore everything, and we'll now reverse. We'll just overtly reverse rather than remanding it to them, and we'll take the case in the first instance and simply say this is an illegal restraining order, and the president's orders stand, and these guys are either going to take the vaccine or be out of the military, period. But, he's going to make them do that. It's a distinct possibility he may force their hand on that. Just letting you know. He might knuckle under and just say, I've lost this battle. Anyway, I'll continue with what Ian has to say here so we can wrap it up and hand things over to Justice soon enough. Justice Putnam belongs on the Supreme Court. That's the solution. All right, so what's up? The order prevailed, but several justices wanted to upend things. Let's examine that end of it. The most astonishing thing about the seal's order is that at least 3 justices, just too short of what we would need to win and make everybody wrong about who the commander-in-chief is, at least 3 justices dissented. It is likely that 6 justices sided with the Navy here. Only 4 justices, the 3 dissenters plus Kavanaugh, chose to reveal how they voted. So it is possible that one other justice silently dissented. Thomas did not explain why he dissented. Oh, so this is actually one of the shadow docket issues, I guess. Thomas did not explain why he dissented, because he was busy being in the hospital. But Alito published a brief opinion, joined by Gorsuch, which lays out why he thinks that judges should be allowed to countermand orders handed down to military personnel by their commanders. Among other things, Alito complains that the Navy did not provide service members with the meaningful process they could use to request a religious exemption from the vaccination requirement. Small bore issue. The Navy provided the court with several statements from high-ranking officers explaining why it requires nearly every sailor to be vaccinated and why it generally considers unvaccinated special warfare personnel undeployable. According to Admiral William Lesher, the Navy's second highest ranking officer, Navy vessels have only limited medical facilities. You remember what happened on board the, was it the Thomas Jefferson? Is that the name of the aircraft carrier that was hit by the COVID outbreak that had to dock in Guam and try and recover? Anyway, it doesn't matter whether it is or isn't. But William Lesher, the Navy's second highest ranking officer, said they have only limited medical facilities. So if one of the ship's crew becomes seriously ill, that would require a return to port or an emergency medical evacuation by helicopter, potentially forcing the whole ship to abandon its mission to accommodate one unvaccinated service member. Special warfare personnel, moreover, often deploy in very small units, so one member becoming sick is a big blow to the team. And the Navy argued special operations are often conducted in hostile, austere, or diplomatically sensitive environments where a severely ill service member might not be able to obtain local medical care and may need to be evacuated by the Navy, an operation that is in itself dangerous and it could force the sick service member's fellow sailors to risk their lives on his or her behalf. To these concerns, Alito essentially said, prove it. Oh boy. In order to win at trial, Alito wrote in response to the Navy's warnings, it would not be enough for the government to posit that sending an unvaccinated SEAL on such a mission might produce such consequences. Rather, the Navy would have to prove that requiring vaccination is the least restrictive means of furthering the interest it asserts. In light of the present nature of the pandemic, what is known about the spread of the virus and the effectiveness of the vaccines, prevalent practices, and the physical characteristics of Navy SEALs and others in the special warfare community. I want to emphasize, Ian says, the sheer enormity of what Alito is suggesting here. Once the Supreme Court permits a single service member to defy a direct order, that opens the door to any member of the armed forces who disagrees with an order running to court to seek an exemption. That's the general problem with it. I'm glad we finally got around to that. By the way, the specific problem with it is all the stuff that Alito says needed to be proved in court actually would be fairly easy to prove. The smallest, most picayune issues you could talk about are the logistics of having to evacuate an ill crew member. I mean, that's all true, and that's the reasoning behind it. But basically, it comes down to this. The president is the commander-in-chief. He orders this very simple and very routine vaccination for members of the military services, and they say no. And a court says, you know what? We could decide that part of the Constitution doesn't count.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, we should have spent more time on this because it's actually very important. But I thought I'd give you a flavor of what's going on. In the meantime, it's time now to hand things over to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasies, Justice Putnam. And he'll take you on his own tour of the news from around the country and around the world next.